I'm going to talk about Wheel of Time, and this is probably going to be a longer video. I've been asked in the comments and some other videos like what fantasy I would actually recommend, um, and it's honestly quite hard for me to say because I haven't really read a lot of fantasy that I actually like. I have quite a few sci-fi books that I can recommend with no reservations, and I will recommend Wheel of Time, but I have reservations, and there's a lot of negative that could be said about the series, and even like the way Jordan writes it and some of the things he does as a writer that can get on your nerves. And I will mention some of these things, but I do want to say out the gate that for me, Wheel of Time is actually kind of like the archetypical good fantasy series, despite many of the faults that it does have. It ends up being like if there was like another series out there that was like Wheel of Time, and somebody said, "Oh, if you like Wheel of Time, you'll definitely like this," I would read it. Of course, people say that about like Sanderson stuff, and I'll get to why I don't agree with those comparisons. But the other thing is like I think one thing you have to keep in mind is that there are so many books in the series, and Robert Jordan, unfortunately, what happened, just in case you don't know, he got he wasn't really that old. Like, I mean, it wasn't like he was 30, but he was like in his 50s or early 60s, I think. And he got diagnosed with like a terminal illness. He had enough time that he knew he was going to die, but like not enough time to actually finish anything. And he like entrusted his wife, who had been, as far as I understand, had been kind of like collaborating. I don't think she was writing anything, but he definitely had shared ideas with her, and she was well aware of like where the book was supposed to go, I think. And he like entrusted her to find someone to finish it, and that's how Brandon Sanderson was pulled in. Um, but that's not really the topic here. The point is, it's really long, and I think Jordan would have finished it if he hadn't, unfortunately, died early. But it's really like when I think of the best books I've ever read, they're usually one single book, and they're usually pretty short. Um, as you go into 10 plus book series, it becomes really hard to keep the narrative threads together, to execute character arcs that have been spanning your like decades of your own life. You know, that is no easy feat, and Jordan does it remarkably well, all things considered. um, my own backstory with this book is that I read book one when I was in high school. I think what happened actually was that I read books 1 through 3 of A Game of Thrones, and at the time, this was 2003, only books 1 through 3 were out, and I finished it and was like, oh, this is so good, but I want to read some other fantasy, and I settled on Wheel of Time. And I think within a year, it was, yeah, definitely, in probably less, it was probably like 6 months, I read all of them that were out at that point. And I think it was like Winter's, I forgot them. There's one of the books has the name Winter in it, or Twilight in it, or something. That book came out like right as I was finishing the book before it. The new book came out, and I bought it and read it. And um, but then what happened was like the next book didn't come out for a while, and I kind of like I'd started college at that point, and I was doing other stuff, and I kind of lost track of it. And then I jumped back occasionally and was like, okay, let's catch up. And I would catch up. And then Jordan died, and I was kind of like, well, like, I guess I'm not going to read those anymore, unfortunately. And the other thing that happened too is it is widely agreed upon, more or less, that there is a period in the books known as the slump. and the slump has several things happening, which it's hard to say. And one of the consensus things about the slump, I think, is that people say the slump felt especially bad if you were waiting many years for each book to come out, and then a new book came out and it was a slump book. And this is what happened to me too. The book that came out when I was initially reading it was one of those slump books. And I remember reading it and being kind of, I was quite disappointed actually, and I thought like, oh, this one really wasn't that good, was it? And it was one of those things too. Like I believe that specific book had there was only maybe 50 pages or fewer of the main character POV chapters. Like there's several main characters, but like the main character had almost no point of view chapters in that entire book. And the slump was also, I'm going to avoid doing any real spoilers in this video, so I have to be pretty vague, but there was a book in the slump where like one of the main side characters, his entire story for the entire book was something which just simply didn't need to happen. And kind of the context for this whole series is that, and this is not a spoiler, that there's this thing that's going to happen called the last battle, and it's known that it's going to happen. And the entire series is all of the characters like developing their arcs so that they're ready for this last battle. And the main character specifically is the prophesied guy known as the dragon. He's not a dragon. There are no dragons in this book, but that's just like his nickname. It's confusing. I remember when I first read it, I was like, oh, so he's gonna like turn into a dragon. No, there are no dragons in this book. But it's like it's known that he is the central figure that needs to defeat the Dark One in the last battle, and he starts out as a farmer, and in a very short period of time, he has to kind of like unite the world, solve a bunch of problems, and then get everyone and himself prepared for this battle. And so during the slump, like it's kind of like, I feel like a little bit insensitive saying this, but like knowing that Jordan was going to die, Jordan known that he was going to die, were I able to kind of time travel and tell him, I would say something like, hey man, you're not going to make it. You're not going to finish this story. Do you really want to have this character doing this side quest for the entire book? Maybe instead we can just progress and get to the last battle, and you can finish it before you die. Like it's just this kind of thing. Like it ultimately kind of becomes like a pacing issue in some sense. Like we're really getting close to the last battle, and then you throw in like a pointless rescue mission for one of your characters that just didn't need to happen. So kind of zooming out a little bit, the thing that I really like about the series though is that and I realized this as I was talking about other books that I don't like. So for example, I consider the Red Rising series to be fantasy. I know you might say, no, it's sci-fi because it takes place in the future on spaceships and all the planets are colonized, but it's fantasy. It's not sci-fi. You can argue with me about that, but it's fantasy. And that one is like, it's just revenge. And then The Will of Many, revenge. And so it's kind of a thing I've been noticing. And then the entire lit RP genre is also just all very often about revenge. And as a writer, I noticed like when you have a character motivated primarily by revenge, if you set the revenge up to seem righteous and justified, it's very powerful. Like it is a very built-in, noble, motivating force. And I think Red Rising actually does this extremely well. Like I don't really like Red Rising, but I'm not gonna say it's bad. I'm just gonna say it's not for me. Whereas I would say like Joe Abercrombie is bad, Sanderson is bad, but Red Rising wasn't bad. It's just not for me. But he set that up incredibly well. Like the initial, I don't know how like many pages it was, but that initial arc that sets up the main character. I think his name is Darrow or something. Darrow's like origin story and the reason that he needs revenge was executed perfectly, such that no matter how far into the series you are, you always agree that Darrow is justified in his revenge. There's never a point where you're like, well, why doesn't he just like, can he just not let this go? You know, it's always like, it's like, no, this is like, his revenge arc reflects all of the injustices of this dystopian society, and it's fully justified, right? Same thing with the Will of Many in a sense, like, but I think the Will of Many doesn't do it as well, and you kind of, I think the character himself sometimes forgets that he's all about revenge. Um, with all that said, like the revenge is an easy motivator that you can do, and there's this notion of like powering up power fantasy. I think some people would label Wheel of Time as a power fantasy, and I actually would not. I think that's it's not immediately clear, and I wouldn't fault you for calling it a power fantasy, but it's not like so in Red Rising, even though there's not like a magic system, and I did say it's not sci-fi, it's fantasy, but Darrow is like, he basically like genetically engineers himself to, he uses like technology to make himself more powerful, and then the story, like throughout each book, he gains power within the hierarchy of this society, and he gets more and more people under his command. He becomes more influential, um, and he gains allies. Like this is all a power. This is powering up power fantasy, and in the Will of Many, you know, he's mastering like different magic systems on different planes of existence, and it seems like in book 3 he's probably going to like unify all of his alternate plane forms into this like confluence of 3 magic systems all being used together or whatever. And the problem is, when you do this, and you have this like really powerful character, if you're not careful, it can become this just like unchecked power fantasy, which is what I think often happens in lit RPG, and it becomes like less literary, to put it one way. It becomes kind of like slop. That word is being overused, but I think it's appropriate to say, like, when you have a like if you write a story where it's like, what is the main character's motivation, and the main character is just like, oh, he wants to become like the most powerful badass guy in the world, and you're like, okay, but yeah, like I get that, but like why does he want to be the most powerful badass guy in the world? And it's like, because it's just insanely cool if you can beat up anybody, and if you are like so powerful that you can like change the orbit of the planet. That's just like insanely cool. I'm like, okay, yeah, but like what is he like, once he reaches this goal, like what is his like true motivation for doing this? Is like, that's it, man, he just wants to be powerful. Like that doesn't, that's not some people might like that, but it's kind of slop, right? And so people like, authors realize this, and you know, like the guy, I forgot his name, the Red Rising author, the Will of Many author, realized like, okay, well, I yeah, like I do want it to be kind of a power fantasy, but I need to make it like justified. And the revenge motivation is the cleanest way to do it, because I got to become more powerful so that I can get revenge from my family, from my wife, so that I can fight this system and destroy it from within. Like that becomes very noble. And then every time you see the character hyper motivated to become more powerful at great cost or whatever, you're like, well, it's justified. Of course, it's noble for them to do this. Um, so Wheel of Time doesn't do this. Wheel of Time does what I like and what I want fantasy to do, which is to pose an ontological question. I think that's what's the most interesting thing fantasy can do. Tolkien is a good example of this, where it's like, what if the creation myth? What if there was a creation myth that was true? And I don't mean to intentionally throw shade at Christians, but in our real world, we of course have creation myths, but none of them are actually true. Like none of the creation myths are actually true. They're all just things that people made up, and um, and as such, there is no direct evidence of any of these creation myths or gods or um, like the creator's influence on the world. None of that is there's no direct evidence of it, because it's not happening. It's not real. My own ontology like would be that I mean, I do think there is a miraculous, like, whatever you call a higher power, whatever, there is, it is reality itself. There doesn't have to be, there's no story. It's just this is fundamentally, in of itself, the miracle of creation, and it's happening all the time. Like, I mean, that's really outside of the scope of this, but like I differentiate that because for me, the interesting thing about fantasy is, this is my ontology, that there is no anthropomorphic creating figure. There is no agentic power that made our world and has some kind of like touching of it in a way, like in Lord of the Rings, for example. You have the Valar or whatever, like Gandalf, these like angel type figures that come to Earth, and Gandalf is like a wizard, but he's actually like a demigod, and he interacts with people in the world, and people know him. And the elves have this kind of like semi-mortal thing going on, when their realm is like not, it's physically across this ocean, right? But there's a very mythical feeling to it. And then evil is directly touching the world in the form of like Sauron and stuff, right? And then you have these objects like the rings of power and stuff like that. So but in our real world, none of that happens. And you can say, oh no, actually Jesus walked the earth and died for our sins, and like, well, like prove it. Like it's just like, you're free to believe that, but there's no like direct involvement. And we have, throughout the course of human history, there have been hundreds of creation myths, and there's no evidence of any of them. So what I like about fantasy and Wheel of Time is that the creation myth, usually, I mean, you might have different religions in a fantasy world, but a lot of times what happens is, like, and Wheel of Time does this, the creation myth is real, and it's directly touching the world, and everyone can see that. there's like there's like what it's like. So it's this ontological question, like what if there was a creation myth that was real? What if like the Old Testament idea of God, where he was flooding, like getting angry and flooding the world, um and talking to people via burning bushes and stuff like that. Like what if that was really happening? What if it wasn't just in the Old Testament, it was actually happening? And so fantasy does this cool thing. Like that's what I like about fantasy, when it does this cool thing and says like, okay, well, here I'm just some guy. My name's Robert Jordan or Tolkien, and I'm gonna make up my own creation myth. I'm gonna come up with a whole intricate thing that sounds interesting to me, and then I'm gonna write a plot that takes place within that world that I've created, but that also has a creation myth behind it. And that myth is actually real to the characters, and the characters have direct evidence that it's real. So the Wheel of Time, they have the creation myth is there was a creator, and there's the Wheel of Time is this cyclical, there's a cyclical nature to it. There's like 7 or 8 ages, I think. I think it's 7. There are 7 different ages, and it's like a wheel. So and actually one cool thing Jordan does do is he says that we are the first age. So if you kind of follow his ontology, he makes it plausible in a sense, because the second age, we kind of discover the one power, which is the energy that is used. Like the one power is the force that moves the wheel and weaves the pattern. And so it's like he asked this question, like, what if this ontology was real? But then he kind of does a fun little thing and says, well, it could be we're just in the first age, and we haven't yet discovered that direct evidence of the creator, but we will. But so then anyway, then the story itself, the Wheel of Time, takes place in the third age. And the idea is that you progress through the ages, and then you go back to the first age again. But each time you go back, it's a little bit different. Like things can change from the cycle of the wheel to cycle of the wheel. But there are things like the idea that so the main character, his name is Rand al'Thor, and the idea is kind of that by the time the wheel goes all the way back around and we get back to the first age, the recorded history of Rand al'Thor has become so warped that the Nordic people come up with this idea of Thor. Like the idea has persisted just enough that they have a god named Thor who can command lightning and stuff or whatever, right? But that cyclical nature, like by the time the wheel goes all the way around, there's almost nothing remembered. And every time a new age starts, there's usually a kind of like disruptive event that makes it hard to have continuity between the ages. Like there's never seems to be good record keeping between the ages. So I think Jordan just does a really good job with this, and he makes that creation myth feel very real. The Dark One is the main like antagonistic force in the story, but the Dark One is not a person. It's like a counter force to the creator, and it's not a person, but it can influence the world. And what happens within the story is that, like, this is kind of backstory, but the idea is that sometime in the second age, and the second age was marked by when people had discovered the one power, which is like, it's the force of creation, and some people are able to channel it and do things with it. But there's men and women use it differently. So when men, the male aspect is called Saidin and the female aspect is called Saidar, and they have to channel differently and they can't see. So like if women are channeling, women who can channel can see other women channeling, and men who can channel can see other men channeling, but men can't see women channeling and vice versa. So there's like it's a it's not just a theme, it's something that Jordan beats you over the head with gratuitously, that men and women cannot understand each other, that men and women have differences, men and women are constantly in conflict and arguing with each other. And however, when men and women are able to work together, they are that's like when things really work. And that is reflected in the one power. And the most the truly great feats that can be accomplished with the one power require men and women to channel together, to link together, and use Saidin and Saidar together. And you can kind of ontologically, I think that's really interesting because you have like this force of creation, but then when humans are able to touch it, it has to be split into these two, male and female aspect. And that's kind of like a cool like symbolic creation, like parallel to the ontology touching the magic in the book. And then what happens at the end of the second age is that somebody who's like a scientist basically, but within the second age, like it's kind of, the second age is only ever shown through flashbacks and people talking about it vaguely. It's you never really get a clear picture of it. And so I'm not spoiling too much with this. This is just kind of like backstory. But the second age feels kind of like, with the one power mastered, the people who can channel the best are the most influential and important. But it's like a utopia. There are no more wars. In fact, like people have forgotten how to fight. Like nobody even remembers warfare or tactics or strategy. That's all been forgotten because everything is so harmonious and good in this age. But one of the scientists, and so a scientist is like able to channel because their science and technology is all like functioning through the one power. She discovers like in this thing that's I think is kind of like a particle accelerator almost, but like for the one power, she discovers that there is a version of the power that they call the true power. And she can sense that it's like behind this barrier. And she can tell, like, however her experiments work, she can sense that this power would be not split into Saidin and Saidar. It would be the true source. It would be like the direct power of creation. And so she attempts to break through this barrier and get to that power. And then when she breaks through, that thing ends up being the Dark One. And so then that immediately unleashes the Dark One from this prison that the creator put him in at the moment of creation. And so as soon as the Dark One is freed, he's able to influence the world. And what we see from the Dark One is that he basically can like, and again, it's not a person, it's like a cosmological force or something, but it can directly talk to you inside your head, and it can like offer you stuff. And then if you agree, like if it convinces you, you have to like consensually agree to serve the Dark One. Like it can't do anything for you if you don't like commit to it, and like it's kind of like selling your soul in a sense, right? But one of the first things that happens is the scientist who unleashed the Dark One, it speaks to her because she's right there, I guess, and she immediately pledges herself to him. And so then that's called being the Forsaken, you're forsaken if you pledge yourself. If you're one of the most powerful people who pledges themselves to the Dark One, you become one of the Forsaken. And a bunch of these powerful channelers from the Age of Legends pledged themselves to the Dark One and became there was like 10 or more Forsaken. But the most powerful channeler of all is the dragon, and he ends up like leading. There's this really long war. I think it's like the war happens for like a decade or something, and it's like basically all of the people who agreed to help the Dark One, and they make like one of the Forsaken is able to like genetically engineer these like monster type things and stuff. And so they have like these monster armies, and they have a bunch of other like regular humans who agree to help the Dark One. And there's just like a big war. And throughout this war, various people that were good, that were on the same side as the dragon, like they become Forsaken and go over to the Dark One. But ultimately what happens is the dragon comes up with a plan to seal the Dark One back in his prison. And he tries to convince all of the channelers to do it, but the women don't agree with him. And so this is like, this is the theme. This is like the theme hitting you over the head sometimes, but he can only convince the men to do it. And the women have some other plan. I forgot what the women's other plan was, but they're worried that the sealing thing is too dangerous, and they think there's a better way to do it or something. But the dragon is like convinced that this is the best option. So he gets 100 of the strongest male channelers to go with him. They do this like surgical strike on the Dark Ones. There's like the area where he was like freed is like the nexus of his influence. And they go there and they do this stuff with the power, and they successfully are able to seal him and all of the Forsaken back into the prison. But the seal is done with these like magical seals rather than just like the creator himself having done it. And so they succeed, but at the very last moment before the Dark One is fully sealed in, he's able to taint saidin. Not saidar, but saidin. And the reason he's able to taint saidin is because all of the men were there, and they were like channeling, so he was able to reach out and touch saidin, but not saidar, because the women weren't there. And so what happens is once saidin is tainted, anyone who channels it feels this like, it's described very well. Like Jordan does a good job describing what it's like to use the power. So when you channel, it's like as the power is flowing through you, all of your senses are amplified, and it's got this kind of like addictive quality to it as well, where you wouldn't want to channel all the time because you have to have some control and restraint, and you can always pull more of the power into you, but if you do too much, you can die or burn out the ability to channel. So there's like this like push and pull with it. But after saidin is tainted, anytime that a male channels, they feel this like slick, oily, sticky feeling in addition to the good feeling of the power. And so they still feel all of that good stuff, but it's like tainted. And then as they channel, like after they stop channeling, after they feel the taint, some of that taint lingers like on them. And over like a year or 3 or 4 or 5, it depends for each person, the taint starts to make you go insane. And so what happens is like, even though the Dark One got sealed away and it feels like everybody won, all of the male channelers start going insane at different times. And the really powerful ones they're able to channel enough that they like are blowing up, they're like blowing mountains up, reshaping continents, destroying entire cities. And it basically functions as like a nuclear apocalypse, with these men just kind of all blowing up and going crazy and killing thousands of people as they go out or whatever. And so that marks the end of the Second Age. And the dragon himself, if I've convinced you to read the book so far, what I would do is read get book one or like a sample of book one and just read the prologue. The prologue is really good. Like if you read the prologue and don't like it, you probably won't really like the book, I guess. If you do like the prologue, I would also say that the prologue um, is not entirely indicative of the style of the book. I think the prologue is highly polished and very tight, where the series is not necessarily those things. Um, but what happens in the prologue is one of the Forsaken goes to see the dragon after he's gone completely insane, and the dragon has gone insane to the point that he's killed his entire family and his wife um, using the power, and some of them are like melted into the floor. Some of them are just like blown up or killed or whatever. His wife is like covered in blood, dead on the floor. And he's just walking around like calling his wife's name out, trying to find her. And he's like, "Where are you?" And she's like, right at his feet, dead. And so the Forsaken dude comes in and he's like, "Oh man, I defeated you and I wanted to gloat. I wanted to like brag that I defeated you, but you're too insane to even register that I defeated you." So he uses like the Dark One's power to temporarily heal the dragon of his insanity, um, just enough for him to realize that and remember that he killed everybody that he loves, and that prompts him to pull as much of the power in as he can, and then he blows himself up, and it like hits down into the core, like the mantle or whatever, wherever the magma is, right? And then like it creates a volcano where he dies. And then we jump from the prologue to chapter one, and we see the reincarnation of the dragon as a farmer. And he was born, and you learn later he was like born on that mountain that the dragon blew himself up to create. So getting back to I've gone very far on the backstory of this, but I've chosen to do that because I think it's the strongest part of this series is the ontology, the creation myth, the cyclical nature of the wheel. And the dragon is reincarnated, and then rather than being motivated by revenge, it's this kind of thing where he eventually finds out that he's the dragon, and like he doesn't really believe it at first, almost. And there's another interesting thing is that like when we get to the second age, at the time of the book, the main story of the book is 3,000 years after the dragon died for the first time. So you see a world that is completely changed, where men are not allowed to channel. The women are the only channelers left. So women the women channelers are very powerful, but without the men to balance them, they've become kind of like, and this is again the theme hitting you over the head, they've become incredibly like confident and nagging, and they always think that they know better. But then of course the men are always portrayed as like kind of bumbling and um mulish or stubborn, etc. Like everyone, it's not really sexist or anything. Like I think it's a very especially considering it was like started in the late 80s. It's, if you're very sensitive and like you have really like strong modern sensibilities about like I don't want to use the word woke. I don't like using the word woke dismissively necessarily, but like I I do think that like people have kind of overreacted sometimes, and people will like cancel an author for like a problematic portrayal or something like that. But this series has like, I would say like an equal number of male and female main characters, and they're really interesting and dynamic male and female characters that are very powerful male and female characters that are influential and important. And that's part of the third age with the women channelers being so powerful because they're the only ones that are allowed to use the power. So in some ways, they're more powerful than any king, um, or any man for that matter. Um, and they actively go search for men that can channel and gentle them, which means they use their magic to cut the men off from being able to channel at all, and they do that to prevent the men going crazy and killing everybody basically. Um, so what I like though is that when the dragon finds out that he's the dragon, when the female characters figure out that they can channel and they need to go be women channelers and join this order of women that kind of rule the world from their they literally have an ivory tower that they rule the world from. um, there's always like a reluctance, and like the thing I talked about, like you can't just have a character being like, I just want to be the most powerful ever because it's badass. The dragon needs to become the most powerful ever because otherwise he cannot defeat the Dark One. Because that's the other thing that happens is that the Dark Ones, the seals start to fail, and the Forsaken come out first, and then the Dark One is like slowly coming back out, and so the dragon needs to be like he has to go from like farmer to the most powerful guy in the world again in like 2 years. He knows he has very little time, and even though we do see him like becoming influential, uniting nations, becoming super powerful channeler again, there's never a sense that he's just doing it to be a badass. And there's not like it's kind of like that ontology of the Dark One is this force that has to be dealt with, and the creator has conscripted you as his proxy, almost like you are the creator's proxy to keep the evil in check or whatever, right? And even though he does become the most powerful person in the world again, it's like as a reader, I never really find myself thinking, man, I wish that were me. Because it's always shown, even when he's like completely dominating somebody, or when he's ruling or taking over an entire country, you never have this feeling of like, oh, he's doing it because he wants to be a badass. It's just like he has to do this. Like this is the minimum thing he needs to do to prevent the entire whole of existence from being destroyed by the Dark One. Like, and so that, and you can say like that feels kind of cheesy, especially like the Dark One is not really the best that Jordan could come up with, but as you really get into it, it really kind of just starts to fit and work. And I think that's what I like the best about it. And I've gone pretty long now. Like I will say, things that I don't like. There are some characters who never really quite click for me. And there are times when I feel like Jordan will do things which just don't quite make sense to me from a pacing perspective. Like in one of the books, like I think it's like book 4, I'm listening to this book with my kid. He's like 8 years old. So one thing that's kind of cool about Wheel of Time is like, I wouldn't say it's like great for an 8-year-old necessarily. My kid is really good at reading, and he understands it really well. But like Jordan never gets gratuitous. So like if you're thinking of like reading it with your kid, like there are like certain scenes where like people are being tortured or eaten by monsters, but he never gets like gratuitous with it to where it feels like, oh, this is like, I can't have, like, my kid can't listen to this. It's always kind of like just the right amount of like, same with the sex scenes. Like if if you're a grown up, you know 100% that they're going to have sex or whatever, but like it's never actually depicted, and I kind of like that because that the whole like grim dark thing in fantasy has been, I think it's often just kind of like stupid and over the top for no reason. Um, but the what I was saying with my kid is that like there was, it must have been hundreds of pages. I think there's a part where two of the women characters are like, they're like on the, they know that one of the Forsaken is kind of like hunting them, and so they have to like go undercover it as like performers in this traveling carnival, and like, and then they have to try to get on a boat, and then they have to take a boat to get to a place. And I think it, you know, there were like hundreds of pages of like developing the different various characters who are also part of the traveling circus, having the two female characters fighting with each other and arguing, having another one of the characters arguing with one of the performers. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's like, you really, you look at it and you think to yourself, he could have simply said, like, he could have opened a chapter and said something like, um, it had been a month since they got a boat and escaped from the name of the city, and said goodbye to the other performers, and now they were on the shore of the place they were trying to get to. Like it could have been hundreds of pages, could have been reduced to a transition sentence or transition paragraph or whatever. But no, we see 100 pages of just arguing, and it just becomes ridiculous at points. Um, but and that happens kind of a lot. Like, so what I will say though is like rereading it, because so I guess I forgot to mention that as I'm rereading it now. So I'm on like book 6, and I read it back when I was 20 years ago, and now I'm rereading it again. But rereading it, I've really liked it, and all the stuff that bothers me, it's interesting to see because it's like it's bothering, the stuff that bothered me is bothering my kid too. He's just like, dude, this is, he's like, come on, like why are they still on this boat? Why are they still on the surface? Why do we have to have another chapter of them like cattily arguing with each other? Um, but you know, at some point you just kind of have to accept like this is what Jordan likes to do, and he really seems to love it. Like, and there's something to be said for that, where it's like, yes, he really should have condensed this down. Yes, he should have had things happen sooner, but ultimately he really loves doing this. He loves showing women getting, um, he loves showing women gossiping and arguing with each other. He loves showing men be, um, be like obstinate and overly confident and refusing to admit that they messed up. He loves just showing that kind of stuff and then having them argue and having misunderstandings between men and women. He just loves doing that. And that's like, he loved doing it so much that he created an entire creation myth about saidin and saidar. I mean, it just kind of works at that point. And I think that's like ultimately what just doesn't work for me with Sanderson, is because I think largely the case is that Sanderson is a Mormon, and he believes in a really weird creation myth. He he thinks that an angel came down and handed Joseph Smith a golden plate, and then he thinks that Joseph Smith, God went through Joseph Smith and helped him translate a scroll of hieroglyphics that was proven to not be what he said it was. But you know, like when you have like a really like stupid cartoonish creation myth that you actually believe, I don't think you're really able to create an interesting ontology, and take it very seriously, at least. Um, though I would say, like, Gene Wolfe was a Catholic and he was great at doing this. So I don't know. Maybe it's just it varies from person to person or something. And I don't actually know what Jordan's religious beliefs were. Um, but that's the kind of the thing is I think Sanderson just isn't able to. Sanderson, like, with Jordan, the Sidene, Sidar, the true power, the pattern, the dark one, the Sidene and Sidar and the channeling and how individual people become more powerful in using the magic was downstream. It was all very downstream of his ontology. And in book one and two, really, the magic was the channeling was very hand wavy. It was not a magic system as Sanderson would define it. It only really started to become systematic starting around book three, maybe. And I think that was kind of something that Jordan realized he could do along the way. But so the magic system as such was downstream of the ontology and the creation myth. And I mentioned this in the Sanderson video. I think for Sanderson, the magic system is the point, and then everything else is made. So he starts bottom up from the magic system, and then he makes up an ontology based on it. Whereas Jordan is top down. He starts with the creation myth, and then builds down from there. So would I recommend it? Yes, I would. Book one is quite a bit different than all the other books. There are things which are not necessarily retconned, but you can tell that there is a very big tonal shift between books one and two. Book two is really enjoyable though, and book one is as well. But I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a warning that book one does not necessarily represent the series as a whole. Once you get to book three, though, you pretty much know what you're in for, and I would recommend it. So thanks for watching. Bye.